Hi everyone. So welcome back to this lesson on one of the three phases of colonialism in India called the mercantilist phase. In one of the previous videos, which was called Term Time Part 1, we had discussed important terms in which we had discussed colonialism, and I mentioned that there were three phases of colonialism in India. So we're going to talk about the first phase in today's lesson. We'll look at terms like Dastaks and Farman. We will look at the policy of expansionism and how that came to change over a period of time. We look at the Battle of Plassey and how that also proved to be a big game changer when it came to the British rule in India. And of course, we'll also talk about this internal conflict that was going on in Britain amongst the British manufacturers and the traders, right? So what are the features of mercantilism? When we say mercantilist phase, तो इसका मतलब है क्या? तो सबसे पहले इसका जो फीचर होता है, the feature is that the power and prestige of a country depends upon the bullion or the species of gold and silver that it possesses. So it was very, very important for any country to accumulate wealth. Okay. The second one, all efforts should be made to increase exports and minimize imports so as to prevent the outflow of bullion. This is again quite obvious, but you will be surprised to find out that initially Britain was importing a lot of raw material and goods from India, and this is in fact what led to protests from the manufacturers in Britain. जब वहाँ पे इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन ने होल्ड लिया और धीरे धीरे वहाँ पे इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन होने लगा, तो वहाँ के मैन्युफैक्चरर्स को ये बात बिल्कुल भी नहीं सुहाई. दे वर नॉट हैप्पी विद द फैक्ट दैट इंडियन मेड गुड्स एंड इंडियन रॉ मटेरियल्स वर फ्लडिंग द मार्केट, वेयर एज देयर गुड्स वर नॉट गेटिंग एनी ट्रैक्शन. So that also changed policies to a great extent. The third thing is that the state should provide protection to the mercantile enterprise, and you will gradually of course see that the East India Company did look at the British Crown for that sort of support, because see, to begin with, the East India Company was a company of traders, right? It was just like any other company. But then they looked to the British Crown, and that is what the British Crown was doing. It was gradually cementing its position, and the territories that they were coming to occupy in India were being considered territories of the British Crown and not just of the East India Company. So that is where the state started providing protection, and gradually, of course, with the Act of 1858, things changed to a great extent, as we have seen. So first of all, you need to remember that this was also called the period of merchant capital, and from 1600 to 1757. Why 1757? Because this is when the Battle of Plassey took place and things changed considerably, as we'll find out shortly. The East India Company's role in India was that of a trading corporation. Now, as a trading corporation, what did it do? It used to bring in precious metals and goods etc. into India, and then it used to exchange them for Indian goods like spices, textiles, and then these it used to sell in the market abroad and garner considerable profits. Now, because it was gaining profits from Indian goods, it sought to expand the demand for Indian made goods in Britain and in other countries, and it increased the export of Indian manufacturers and encouraged their production. So obviously, Indian rulers thought that this is a good thing. Who would object to getting their exports enhanced? So Indian rulers tolerated and even encouraged the establishment of the company's factories in India. But हो क्या रहा था यहाँ पे? अगर if we look at the phase just before the Battle of Plassey, this is exactly what had happened when the Farman was issued. There was a royal Farman that was issued by the Mughal emperor in 1717, through which the company had secured valuable privileges. अब वो privileges क्या थे? They had granted the company the freedom to export and import their goods in Bengal without paying taxes, and the right to issue passes और दस्तक. दस्तक in fact जो शब्द है वो आपका उसका मतलब पास ही होता है पर्शियन में, फॉर द मूवमेंट ऑफ सच गुड्स. अब कंपनी के सर्वेंट्स वर ऑल्सो परमिटेड टू ट्रेड, बट दे वर नॉट कवर्ड बाय दिस फरमान, सो प्राइवेट ट्रेड वॉज नॉट कवर्ड. दे वर रिक्वायर्ड टू पे सेम टैक्सेस एज इंडियन मर्चेंट्स. बट हुआ क्या, that there was obviously loss of revenue to the Bengal government. owing to the sort of leeway that had been provided to the East India Company. Secondly, the power to issue dastak for the company's goods was misused by the company's servants to evade taxes on their private trade as well. All the Nawabs of Bengal had objected to the English interpretation of the Farman of 1717, and they had compelled the company to pay some amounts to their treasury, and they had suppressed the misuse of dastaks. So the company had been compelled to accept the authority of Nawabs in this matter. But gradually its servants had taken every opportunity to defy this authority. And then finally, when Siraj-ud-Daulah was there and he tried to be very strict about this, that is when the British used their position strategically and again sort of divide and conquer. There were people who were against Siraj-ud-Daulah within his own establishment. They used that also against him, and then they finally won the Battle of Plassey. So this is what the British were doing, and हो क्या रहा था that the British manufacturers were also jealous of the popularity that Indian textiles were enjoying in Britain. So much so that Willem Dafoe, who is the author of a famous novel called Robinson Crusoe, he had complained that Indian cloth had, and I quote, crept into our houses, our closets and bed chambers, curtains, cushions, chairs, and at last beds themselves were nothing but calicos or India stuffs. Now, obviously, when they started protesting, then certain laws had to be passed. By 1720, laws had been passed forbidding the wear or use of printed or dyed cotton cloth, because Indian goods and raw materials were being used for those purposes. And very interestingly, so much so that in 1760, a lady had to pay a fine of £200 for possessing an imported handkerchief. तो आप समझ लीजिए कि how serious. But here now we come to the Battle of Plassey, because that changed a lot of things. Nabin Chandra Sen, he was a poet, he called the Battle of Plassey a night of eternal gloom for India. This was a battle that was fought between the English and Nawab Siraj-ud-Daulah. And but even having said that, you must remember that the British did not win this completely on their own, and it's partly because it wasn't a battle. Okay, it was more like treachery on the part of some people in the Nawab's establishment. The major part of the Nawab's army was led by the traitors Mir Jafar and Rai Durlab, who did not take any part in the fighting, and as a result of which a lot of people from the Nawab's army fell prey to the British forces, and the Nawab was forced to flee. He was captured and put to death by Mir Jafar's son Miran. The Battle of Plassey's result was that it paved the way for British mastery over Bengal and then the rest of India. It boosted British prestige, considering the way they had won and now that they held sway over such an important territory. It helped the British organize a strong army because of all the wealth that they accumulated. It also played a decisive role in the Anglo-French struggle because the British put up a very strong fort there. It enabled the amassing of untold wealth at the cost of the helpless people of Bengal. So from 1757 to 1764, the company acquired Indian bullion by extortion and plunder. There was systematic inflow of currency in Bengal that started with the dual system of governance in which the company had acquired the Diwani rights. And the British looked at India as the Sone ki Chiriya, or the golden bird that they could keep exploiting. From 1765, a number of experiments were also made in the revenue collection. Because the company in India had to raise and increase its own resources, whether it was for the expansionist wars or for administration or for purchasing Indian goods. Now the strange thing is that no financial help would be forthcoming from London, and even if it did come, it was in the form of a loan on which a very high interest would have to be paid by the company, and for repayment the resources had to be generated in India itself. So this is showing what Dadabhai Naoroji called the drain of wealth from India, and this is where it formally started with the Battle of Plassey, and the whole legacy of foreign trade was given a reverse direction gradually. Also, you need to understand that the fight here was not just the British manufacturers vis-a-vis the company traders, but also the company wanted a monopoly of the trade with India, and it did not want any other European competitor or any other European company to have that position. So the real struggle took place in Bengal and subsequently in other parts of India. So companies such as those of the French, the Dutch, they were thrown out of the picture. The company also did not want Indian merchants to compete with it for the purchase of goods in India and sale abroad. So in this, the dastaks or permits for free trade became their privilege. Then the East India Company had to wage long and fierce wars to achieve its aims with the French, Dutch and Indian rulers. So this is where imperialism and territorial expansion was happening during the tenure of Lord Dalhousie. And post 1857, this imperialist expansion was stopped and consolidation started, which we will talk about when we consider the second phase. Then while the company and the British in general, they had supreme naval power, it was increasing its fold using this naval power, and it was increasing its foothold along the coasts and driving out Indian traders from coastal and foreign trade. But it's just that people were not taking it very seriously in India yet. From 1760s, the Industrial Revolution began in Britain. And what you do need to remember is that by the mid 19th century, in fact, most of the countries of Europe had become industrialized, and this was capitalist industrialization. British capitalism was now beginning to enter its most vigorous phase of development and to move more and more towards capital that was needed for investment in industry, trade and agriculture. And it is said, in fact, that after acquiring the Diwani rights, the company was in a legal position to grab the wealth of local rulers and zamindars as well. Scholars like Madison have pointed out that the drain from India contributed to 2% of Britain's national income at that point of time. And the company, what it did want to do eventually, that it wanted agricultural India to be made an economic colony of industrial England. This is a very, very important statement, and you need to understand this कि इंडिया का बेसिक नेचर क्या था. हम एक एग्रीकल्चरल इकोनॉमी थे, but by gaining all the land revenue that the British were coming up with, we will talk about the different kinds of settlement and land revenue payment systems that the British evolved over a period of time in order to fill their coffers. So agricultural India was being made an economic colony because we did not really have a say in the policies that were being implemented, and the revenue was being extracted from us. Like a sponge, if you remember, we had spoken about John Sullivan having said something very profound, and industrial England would thereby benefit. But here let us also talk a bit about why was industrialization flourishing so much in Britain. See, firstly, British overseas trade had been expanding rapidly in the previous centuries also. Britain, you can hear a train in the background. So interestingly, we'll also talk about the evolution of railways and communication means in India during the British rule, just as a side note. So the British had come to capture and monopolize many foreign markets by means of war and colonialism. They were rapidly expanding this reach, and Britain had already evolved a colonial pattern of trade, which in turn helped the Industrial Revolution. So the colonies and underdeveloped countries exported agricultural and mineral raw materials to Britain, and the latter sold them its manufactures. Then sufficient capital had accumulated in the country for investment in new machinery and the factory system. Thirdly, rapid increase in population could meet the need of the growing industries for more labor and cheaper labor. Fourthly, Britain had a government which was under the influence of commercial and manufacturing interests, and which therefore fought other countries determinedly for markets and colonies. Fifthly, the demands for increased production were met by developments in technology. Okay, and you need to understand here that there was this set of people called the Luddites, or as it is also called as Luddism. And these Luddites were against technology. They felt that technology was destroying the fabric of the economic system as it existed and the social system thereby. So find out about Luddism. It's a very interesting concept. So if you look at people who are a bit skeptical of new technology these days, it can be attributed to Neo-Luddism. So find out what it is, right? And following this then, laissez-faire would come. But here a very important feature of the company's rule in this phase was that no basic or fundamental changes were being introduced in the judicial system, administration, etc. आपको याद होगा कि हमने पिछले कुछ lessons में बात की है how the British overhauled the judiciary, overhauled the police, army, civil services for that matter, but all this was not happening at this stage. And Bipin Chandra concludes that it was not very different from the traditional empires of India. The only slight difference would be that the British were now accountable to what they were doing, but not to the Indians, to the company and to the British Crown. This was also the period when the company administration felt no need to directly penetrate the rural areas as long as agricultural surplus was successfully appropriated by traditional machinery of revenue collection. And gradually you will find out that they sought to change all this with their different kinds of land revenue systems. A number of experiments were also made till from 1765 till the time the permanent settlement was established, and a famous one was made during the tenure of Warren Hastings. What was this? So Hastings constituted a mini commission which was considered to be a landmark in agriculture and revenue system, the first systematic effort to collect authentic data about area under cultivation, the crops grown, the types of land tenure that existed and revenue realization therefrom. In 1793, the East India Company would establish its first formal revenue system called the permanent settlement. So we'll be reading about that also in due course of time, but for now, for tomorrow, we will look at the second phase of colonialism in India, which is known as the laissez-faire or free trade phase, and we will find out what happened then. Okay, so hopefully this was useful for you. Thank you.